Hi, everybody, and welcome. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a topic called AI will decide your API's fate, both in terms of AI being a new API consumer, but also how AI is leveraged in the next wave of API delivery that we're entering, and why sensible AI augmented delivery might be what sets us or you apart from your competitors or peers. So my name is Frank Kilcommins. I'm Principal API Technical Evangelist at SmartBear. I'm a developer and software architect by trade, and I do also quite a lot of work with the Open API initiative. And when it comes to what we're kind of seeing across the market with respect to AI and APIs, of course, AI loves APIs, and APIs are arguably the best and most robust mechanism for us to expose our capabilities, data, and the value that we have on offer towards AI. And they also offer real potential for agentic workflows to be executed, governed, and in a controlled and secure mechanism. Now, the relationship goes both ways, of course. AI gives us the ability to produce APIs and API artifacts faster than we ever had before. And we're all trying to realize the AI-driven opportunity that is in front of us, but we also need to be mindful of AI-driven chaos. So what we're seeing, if things go unmanaged or unchecked because of the accessibility to generate code, artifacts, and API descriptions, we're seeing a proliferation potentially of APIs. And we can also see a risk of inconsistent designs or code being generated. And of course, there's always the risk of there being poor, inaccurate, or even missing documentation. And of course, if we can't make APIs discoverable, then they're not really usable by humans, nor are they usable by AI itself. And we always have to remember that AI is also non-deterministic. So we need to have the quality checks and balances in place to ensure what's being generated is meeting the standards that we're setting forth within our organizations. So while AI could indeed lead to a problem like API sprawl, we also need to consider that AI could be a solution to the API management challenges that we're facing in 2025. If we're scaling without quality, then it's just speeding us up towards failure. So what we need to ensure is that we have strong, well-governed API foundations to allow us to enable AI models to operate in production settings for us. So in this session, I'm going to kind of showcase how we're looking at this from a SmartBear perspective and how we're looking to infuse AI augmented experiences into the API delivery lifecycle. And from a SmartBear perspective, we really do view AI as a catalyst for transformation in software development and testing, and that's especially relevant in the world of APIs. And we're truly committed to building a future where we see AI elevating teams to be able to swiftly craft, access, and deploy high quality APIs and software, and a form of which that will delight the consumer, be that a human consumer or indeed an AI consumer. So what we are proposing is that we use AI as a sensible antidote to the potential chaos. So we want to ensure that we're bringing productivity and efficiency to teams, and that comes through forms of automation, of course, but in a workflow that works across the different teams that you have, and ensuring that there's no context switching and it meets and retains the context of your organization as well. And with that context, we want to increase predictability. So we want to enable you to generate more APIs, change and evolve more APIs, be more inclusive and have more team members participating in that API journey, but do so while always following the best practices for your organization, be that security, be that accessibility, or be that just general API standards. So we want to get to the fact or the place where we can have the predictability being as relied upon as you would expect a calculation to work in a spreadsheet. And the question that we're always kind of trying to ask when we're looking at how to infuse these capabilities are we building the API right with AI? And of course, we're never forgetting that there should be human oversight as part of the process. So we're looking at this from an open API and async API generation perspective. We're also looking at how we can improve governance across organizations by enabling AI to help us generate the rule sets that we want from an API governance perspective. Once we have an open API description and we're confident that it's meeting our governance standards, well, then we should also be able to use those artifacts to generate API functional tests. Maybe we're working more with microservices and we really want to ensure that we can safely evolve our APIs over time. Well, for that, we'll look at API contract test generation. And then when we have an API ready to move into a production setting, then there's also no reason why we can't accelerate the API documentation and productization processes by enabling AI to help us deliver those types of artifacts. So enough with the slides, and in the immortal words of MC Hammer, let's stop and now move into demo time. So what I'm going to showcase first is the AI augmented generation for APIs. So now within our API Hub offering, we have this ability to generate an API using a natural language prompt. So we can specify a template. So this might be a golden template for what a good API looks like within our organization or within a particular department in our organization. And that will really guide what's generated to ensure that it's meeting those standards and using that kind of golden template as the recommended way to generate an API. So in this instance, I'm choosing no template. I'm just going to give the API a name, and then I'm going to describe the requirements of what I want the API generation to do. So I'm just going to paste in a prompt that I have here. So what I'm asking is let's create an API inspired by Swagger Pet Store, but one that adopts some more strict RESTful resource principles. It should have the ability to search for pets, create a pet, modify a pet, add an image of a pet, support let's say donations. And then I'm also asking it to adhere to the problem details RFC. So I'm hitting generate, and what's happening behind the scenes is it's going through our proxy where we're formulating that system prompt, again, following and using the template, using any governance and standardization rules. And what we see is very, very quickly, we were able to generate this first pass at an API. So it has the pets resources with search for pets, add new pets, get pet details, modify a pet. And we're seeing that this is a valid open API description. So this is much, much faster than I would be able to write that open API description by hand or even by using the form editor. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to save this API to my hub. So I'm saving it. And I talked a little bit about the governance rules and the fact that this is valid, but now let's enable some organizational standard rules for our org and see if we can get the API to also abide by those governance rules. So I'm just going to enable some of the standards here. So get should have a sort parameter. Let's use Pascal case for naming. We don't want verbs as part of the paths, and I'm just going to enable some requirements around how date fields are structured. And then also, let's just enable that a semantic version must be specified as part of the API description. So now I've saved those. I'm going back into the API that we generated using the AI augmented generation. And we're seeing that we have 45 governance issues here where this API is not following along from our standards. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to our Halo AI augmented experience. And I'm going to say, now that we have enabled standardization rules, let's fix up the API so that it's following the rules and honoring the rules as we would expect. So now what it's done is it's done its best to apply those rules, and I need to hit save to run the actual linting here in the front end as well. And what we're seeing is that it fixed up 44 of those issues pretty quickly. So again, much, much faster than I would be able to do by hand. It didn't quite get the verbs in the path one correct, but that's okay. I'm just really looking at this as something to accelerate my workflow. I don't expect what it will do will be absolutely everything, but it makes it much, much more productive for me to have this type of editing experience. So again, if we look at one of the examples here, we can see that it has all of the schemas that we would expect. And what I'm going to do here is just, let's see if we can ask it to edit the API. So let's add another string property to the pet schema here. Maybe for, let's say, location would be a good property to also know where the pet is located if we're going to try to adopt a pet. So again, I ask our AI augmented experience to do this work for me. And again, behind the scenes here, when it's creating that system prompt, is it's getting all of the standardization rules. And again, it's ensuring that it's abiding by them. So we can see the new location parameter that it created here is already following Pascal case, which is part of our standards. So again, pretty powerful. So now that we have an open API description, let's move on to the governance part. So what if I want to use AI to also help me add new governance rules for an API? So here I'm going to create a new spectral rule, and I'm going to give a prompt. So I'm going to ask it to create a rule for path parameters to enforce snake case. So I'm providing some valid examples of what snake case would be. So first underscore name or name, both of those are valid. And I'm also providing some invalid use cases. So again, it's creating the system prompt behind the scenes to do this for us through our proxy. And here we can see it created that rule. I can then save the rule to our rules catalog. And let's just go back into our API catalog. We'll find an API that potentially is not conforming with that rule. So I'm going to just go into this car rental API, and we can see that it has some issues here. So if we look at the Swagger UI representation on the right, we can see there's a few car IDs which are camel case and not following the Pascal case rule. So again, I'm just going to ask via the AI prompt for the AI augmented buddy to help me remediate all instances of path parameters that are not conforming with our new rule. So again, waiting for that system prompt to be constructed and sent off. And then we can see that all of those have been updated here. And we now have path parameters that are following our new convention. And again, what we always recommend is that, we always have to have human reviews here. So we're going to use the combination of the additional linting and human review to make sure everything that's done here is as we expect, and that the AI hasn't changed something other than what we explicitly requested to be changed. So now we've been able to generate an open API description very quickly using the generative AI experience, as well as create some governance rules. And then if we're happy that we have an API that's ready to take on to the next stage, well, we can look at something that is in our current lab right now for creating some API functional tests. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the API description that we worked on initially, and I'm going to just paste that into our lab environment here. So this is for experiments that we haven't yet rolled out in beta mode. And I'm going to just provide a pretty simple objective here to say, generate some basic CRUD tests for each operation endpoint that's in the open API description that we've just pasted. So again, it's going to go through this process. It's going to leverage the open API description as well as an understanding of what the system prompt will do. So it's going to say, well, for each endpoint, show me your request and also what should be an expected response body and or response status code. And it does that for all of the operations that are within the open API description. We're also working on making sure that this format will be compatible with Arazo, which will actually give us more interoperability with respect to how these tests will be constructed. Now, if we're interested in contract testing, which is, let's say, a much more robust form of kind of point-to-point interaction tests between a client and a server, we also have an ability to reduce the barrier to participation in contract testing. So often some of the feedback that we will receive is that maybe client or provider teams have not done a very good job at crafting the unit tests for their integrations in like a microservices type of architecture. And in order to participate in contract testing, then we expect that you do have those unit tests in place. But we've rolled out this test generation feature that will allow us to, based on the code that you have, generate those tests that will be conformant with the packed structure. So the first wave of that was for Java and JavaScript. We've rolled out a whole load of new programming language support. So here I have a sample TypeScript app. It has a an interaction with a products API. So this is just showing the api.js file, which will make a call out to a products endpoint and a product by ID endpoint. And what we're going to want to do now is to create the packed tests that exercise those expectations that this client application has. So we're sending off a request here to our Packflow AI CLI. We're passing the location of the code file, also the product object. We're saying put the test that you generate into this api.pack.spec.ts file, and the language should be TypeScript. So we see that it's done a pretty good job at creating those tests for us, and it's showing that we should expect a product ID, a name, and a type, and also what expected values are there as part of the matchers. So we're just going to run this test, and we see that the tests pass. So again, very, very easy based on the existing code that we have to get some very good coverage around what's expected. And if we look at how this is constructed, we can see that it may not meet our golden standard for how tests should be written. So last week we rolled out a capability to specify like a golden test template to aid the API generation. So in this particular example, the top level should be the name of the API that you want to test. Level 2 should express the endpoint that you're about to exercise. And then level 3 should explain the explicit tests that are there. And it also specifies that it should be using the packed v4 spec instead of v3, which we would have seen the first time around. And it also supports additional test instructions for the AI. So in this particular example, we could say, okay, well, we actually want to use the Jest testing framework. And we also want to ensure that it's covering positive and negative testing scenarios. So now if we send through the command, we can specify the location of that golden test template, as well as the additional textual or natural language instructions to help guide the AI a little bit more. And what we see here is now we have the structure where it's describing a test for a product API. It's using the pack spec v4 within the get product ID. Given a valid product, it should return a 200 status code. And again, we can run this test to determine if it's successful or not. And sometimes what's generated may not be 100% what we want, but that's fine. Again, there's nothing expected that can't be solved by humans who are also part of the team. This is just really an accelerant to help us get through the process much, much quicker. And the last part of the demo that I'll be taking us through is generating the portal documentation, also being accelerated through our generative AI capabilities. And this has actually been rolled out into beta this week. So it's available to be tested. So I'm just going to generate a getting started type of page. I'm going to give it a description around what I want to be generated as part of the content of the page. So what I want a getting started guide for how to interact with the pet management API. And we should be able to showcase and demonstrate to a consumer how you would go about adding a pet, how you could retrieve the details of a pet, and as well as look at the whole pets that are available. Of course, if you need to modify a pet, it should also explain that. And we want to draw some particular attention to the pet donations to really help with the upkeep for pets. So we're going to add some specific sections into our getting started guide to kind of draw attention to that. What I also then need to do, of course, is I need to paste in the OpenAPI description, and I'm going to hit the generate portal page. While we're waiting for this, I'm going to create a place for this content to go. So I'm going to go over into my portal, and within my adopt pet product, I'm going to add a new page. So I'm just going to go into the adopt a pet product. I'm going to add a new HTML page in this particular instance. I'm going to give the page a name, pet management, and coming back to our lab environment here, we can see that the content has been created. So I'm just going to copy this content. This is now fully rolled out into the portal as well, but I'm just demonstrating it from our lab environment here. Hit create page, and because the output is already formatted as HTML, I can paste this directly into the WYSIWYG editor here, and you can see that the formatting is already as I expect. Now, again, this may not be exactly everything that we want, but I always find it much, much easier to edit some of the content rather than starting from an empty editor. And immediately I can preview what this would look like in the portal from a consumer perspective. So again, I find this much more productive rather than kind of starting editing from scratch. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a tour through how we're looking at augmenting the API delivery lifecycle within our API Hub. So API Hub itself, in case you're not aware, is built on top of open standards. So right at the core of API Hub are the standards like OpenAPI, Async API, JSON Schema, GraphQL and Protobuf are on the way as well. And then around that, we wrap our famous API projects. So I think everyone is aware of Swagger, Spectral, Pact, and Prism. So they form the core around the open standards layer. And then we add our progressively enhanced enterprise and teams capabilities across standardization and governance, gateway integrations, having this universal catalog across the different specifications or API styles, and an ability to test the API, be that manual testing through exploration or contract functional or performance testing, and then productizing those APIs through our developer portal. And where we think makes most sense is where we're augmenting some of those experiences with our AI-enabled capabilities. So hopefully allowing you to get to where you want to go faster. And this is one of the primary ways where we're looking at how AI can really help secure a successful API program for you. So thank you. If you would like to connect and learn a little bit more about what we're doing, be it from an API standards perspective or through some of our open source or commercial products, feel free to reach out to me directly. Thank you very much.